Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 31 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson, and we're going to go over the copyright information, which is on the screen right now. Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated. All rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company Incorporated, a Random House company, and the address is right there. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone Revisited, published and bound in the United States of America, and the Library of Congress stuff is right there. And we have been reading Two Live Ghosts. And we should be almost be done with this story. Now, Hank and Jeff are back, except this time they are in the Medicine Man's Lodge, and they're going to be making some trouble and try to scare away the Medicine Man and the Native American chiefs. So, let's continue where we left off. Soon the babble of voices announced the approach of the Medicine Man, who began his speech in the tone of Numa Makana, but this time a note with a note of triumph. Tonight you have all returned among the living, so there are none who I must summon, as I did before. None like Matachiga, Neowatis, and Tahishka, those who have already gone to the Happy Hills. But again, you may bind me so that you may witness the power of Wakansheka, which will drive away Wakantanka by Conchika and Wagamu. Conchika and Wagamu, Jeff translated in an undertone. That means drum and rattle. Get ready with the tom-tom and the turtle shells. They're all set, Hank assured him, but first we rock the tent like the other night, then the drum and rattle. And after that, we'll put on those grotesque masks we found, and finish with the fireworks, but hold it. Here they come. Lie low. Chieftains had finished binding the Medicine Man. As before, they carried him into the teepee, dumped him there, and returned to the council fire. The moment the flap fell, Jeff and Hank sprang from hiding and made for opposite tent poles. In moments they had the tent quivering. Then they began to jounce it. Excited shouts of Wakansheka, Wakansheka came from the council fire, for never before had the haunted teepee shown such immediate action. Now it was rocking at double speed, and Jeff tilted in one way and Hank the other. Next, Jeff sprang up the pole and clambered hand over hand toward the top, which doubled over and would have fallen but for Hank's restrained action. As the huge tent rebounded, Jeff grabbed for the leather strap that was dangling from the top, swinging like a living pendulum. He shouted in a high-pitched jargon of Indian and English that issued from the open tent top. All odd howls responded from the council fire, where the witnesses were sure that Jeff's cries could only have been of ghostly origin. Hank was ready with drums and shells when Jeff dropped lightly beside him, and together they beat an outrageous din as they pranced about the huddled figure of the Medicine Man, who suddenly began to shout, "Shisha! Shisha! Shisha!" Hank recognized the dialect and panted to Jeff. "He's calling, 'Come here,' to the crowd outside. And here they come," put in Jeff. "Get ready for them." Jeff shoved Hank in one direction and sprang the other way. As the tent flap was flung aside, the two chieftains came driving through, hoping to find the source of the disturbance. They were met with flying drums and turtle shells that Jeff and Hank flung from the darkness. Then, as the Native Americans tried to dodge away, the bearded men overtook them and half thrust, half kicked them into the arms of the others, who scattered as the tent flap fell. Immediately Jeff panted, "Quick, Hank, give me a devil mask. That will hold them until you start the fireworks." Hank snatched up a mask. Jeff put it on and drew back the tent flap, just enough to show the weird grinning visage. It had the effect that he intended. The chieftains ready to invade the teepee, again halted suddenly, crying, Wakantanka, Wakantanka. Clearly they supposed that the spirit of evil Wakantanka had taken charge instead of the good spirit Wakansheka, whom the medicine man had promised to summon. But now there was anger in their cries of Wakantanka. They felt that the medicine man had tricked them, or that he might be putting them to a test to see if they were bold enough to defy Wakantanka's wrath. How long they would restrain themselves was a question. It didn't have to be very long. Hank had snapped his flintlock, and had lighted the candle wick. Now he was using the flame to ignite the paper tube containing powder, which he had twisted at both ends. He tossed it up through the opening of the tent top, where it exploded with a burst of flame. The group fell back as Hank flipped more explosives through the opening. A few of the tubes fizzled and sputtered down to the dry grass around the teepee. The grass caught fire, and soon the flames were licking at the tent itself. At Jeff's call, Hank grabbed up the other devil mask and joined him just as the front flap went up in a huge blaze. The amazed chieftain saw the medicine man struggling with his bonds in the midst of an inferno, flanked by a pair of dancing demons. Suddenly, the two demons grabbed the medicine man and pitched him through the surrounding flames. He squirmed from his bonds and dashed for the horses, which were whinnying in fright at the flames. The medicine man's flight was enough for his followers. They rushed for their horses too. Hank and Jeff flung their demon masks aside and darted from the blazing teepee across the narrow clearing to the tall grass of the hillside, where they looked back from that vantage spot. The teepee had become a tremendous beacon, its flames illuminating the sky. If there are any soldiers within 5 miles, asserted Jeff, just seeing that will bring them here. That's right, agreed Hank. And what they'll be hearing in a couple of minutes will fetch them all the quicker. Again, Hank was right as the Native Americans stood beside their horses, still scanning the flames in search of the missing fire demons. The entire Holocaust burst with one gigantic roar, rocketing the blazing fragments skyward and showering them about the landscape. The fire had reached the powder keg, which Hank had left half filled. The Indians sprang to their horses just in time, as Hank had predicted. The blast sped the arrival of some soldiers who had sighted the beacon earlier. A troop of cavalry came galloping in from the canyon and opened fire on the chieftains as they raced down the valley, with the medicine man accompanying them on a spare horse. Pursuit was brief, for the troopers were unwilling to ride into what might be a trap. A few of them dismounted to inspect the subsiding flames that had consumed the medicine lodge. One trooper spoke to the other. "I wonder why those braves set fire to their teepee," he said. "Anyone have any ideas about it?" "We can tell them," Jeff whispered as he rose from the tall grass. "Come on, Hank, let's give them a report." "Wait now," warned Hank. "Let's hear what those troopers have to say. You're likely to get shot if you walk up to them all of a sudden. They're quick on the trigger." From the way the troopers held their hands on their gun butts, Hank was probably right. Jeff eased down to listen. "No use taking chances chasing Native Americans," declared one trooper grimly. "Not after what happened on the ridge over by Little Bighorn." "The Little Bighorn?" Hank said to Jeff in a whisper. "That's the river where we saw the Indian camp, the Native American camp." "It must have been right bad," put in another trooper. "I've heard that most of General Custer's command was wiped out." "Custer?" Hank gasped. "That's the best Indian fighter in the army. He must be the general the sergeant talked about." "Not just some of them," the first trooper continued, "but all of them. We found bodies all along the ridge, but most of them were near the top, and General Custer was lying dead among them. That's where he made his last stand. There was a pause, punctuated by the occasional crackles of the lessening fire. The Native Americans outflanked the regiment. The trooper went on then. They came up from the far end of the ridge, where there was only a sergeant with a small detachment to meet them. The Native Americans rolled right over them. Another trooper queried, "How big was the detachment?" "Not more than a dozen or so," the first trooper stated. "I was there when they counted the bodies. A few more than a dozen, I reckon, if you include a couple of guys who looked like trappers, or maybe prospectors." "How could you tell that they were prospectors?" "Well, they hadn't shaved in months. One had a big black beard, the other was kind of reddish. Instead of carbines, they had rifles. They were carrying big knives, too, Bowie knives, that we found lying near their bodies." Hank and Jeff looked at each other. Their hands went to their belts, and for the first time since their return from the ridge, they realized that their knives were gone. "They must have put up a good fight, that pair," the trooper told his comrades. "One had his head hacked with a tomahawk. The other looked like he'd been clubbed to death with a rifle butt." He paused, shrugged, and added, "Well, there's no need staying here. Let's mount and get on our way." The troopers were turning to their horses when Jeff forgot Hank's advice, sprang up and approached them, calling excitedly, "Wait, wait!" One of the mounted troops was gazing Jeff's way, but his eyes showed no change of expression, not even the slightest interest. Another trooper, too, was facing in the same direction, but they swung their horses about. Hank's whisper came to Jeff's ear. "They're staring right through us, Jeff." The troopers were riding off to the canyon. Beside the embers of the burned-out medicine lodge, Jeff heard Hank whisper again, "You know what the medicine man said the other night?" "I know," Jeff's tone, too, was a voiceless whisper. "He said that all who saw him standing there, all who heard his voice, all would come back after the battle." "Come back after the battle." Hank's whisper seemed like Jeff's own echo, either as living witnesses or as ghosts of the dead. "We heard what he said," declared Jeff. "We saw him, too, although he didn't see us. But he meant us. Yes, he meant us because we were there. We came back here, Jeff, just as he said we would. We surprised him, but we didn't scare him until he began thinking maybe Wankantanka sent us, only we came here on our own. And we went to all the trouble rigging up the ghost tent." "We just imagined that part, Jeff," Hank said slowly. "We didn't have to rig it, being as we were ghosts already." "And where are we going now, Hank?" "Where they all go after the medicine man calls them back, to the Happy Hills he talked about. We've got a claim stake there, remember?" They were walking side by side just past the ruined teepee toward the grassy hillock beyond, two figures that were strangely elusive in the moonlight. Now even their whispers seemed to mingle with the sigh of the night breeze. Nor were they looking at each other any longer, for they seemed to feel that if they did, they might find the other gone. A cloud dulled the moonlight. The wind lashed the waving grass. The ghostly figures were gone, like pebbles in a pool that leave only ripples in their wake. With them went the secret of the shaking tent, the cherished mystery of the Indian medicine man. Of the Native American medicine man. And that is it for Two Live Ghosts. Now we are going to start reading The Edge of Doom. Geordie, the boy's frantic call went unheard at dusk. As dusk settled over the windswept cliff. Slowly he worked one hand upward and pressed his numbed fingers against the rock to find it smooth without the slightest crack. He drew his hand down again to the crevice it had left, and made a try with his other hand. Again, no luck. Now, with both hands clutching the crevice, he sought new toe-holds, hoping to work his way down, if not up. But it extended his foot Oh. But in extending his foot, he forced his body back. One look over his shoulder showed the jagged gray rocks, waiting like hungry teeth in the darkness at the base of the giant's pillar, hundreds of feet below. Having climbed this far, there was no other way to go but back, to make it all the more hopeless. The very brow of the towering cliff was no more than 3 feet above the boy's reach. If only he could have found one higher hold to work from. Now, clutching tightly to the only hold he could retain, the boy called again, "Geordie!" It was hopeless. It was a hopeless cry, lost in the wail of the rising wind. Twilight was creeping down upon the cliff, and the boy's only hope was to hang on until dawn. But if he could retain his agonizing grip another half hour, he would not only be doing well, he would be doing better than he really believed was possible. There were others too who had their doubts as to what might be possibly. There were others too who had their doubts as to what might be possible. More than a mile away from the great winding cleft where the giant's pillar loomed so formidably, oil lanterns were bobbing like tiny fireflies at the wooden marker where the trails diverged, one leading down into the deep ravine, the other following a slope up the back of the cliff. It was Geordie Buchanan, a bluff-faced, rugged Scotsman who had suddenly called a halt. A man in his mid-60s, Geordie was still remarkably agile. "What's up, Geordie?" the others were saying. "Which way do we look now?" "Did you hear it?" Geordie asked tensely. The Baron's voice calling for me. Calling, "Geordie, Geordie," just as clear as I'm saying it now. His eyes lost their faraway stare as he turned eagerly to a solemn man of about 30. "Do you hear it, Lord Archie?" "You heard the call. You've heard the call before, Buchanan," Lord Archie reminded him, "but none of the rest of us heard it. Or did we?" He turned to the others, who shook their heads. This time, one man spoke up. "All we heard was the howl of the wind. It's coming right strongly through the gap." "Then that's where we'll find the Baron, climbing the giant's pillar, all on his own." "You really believe that, Buchanan?" Lord Archie's anxious query brought a solemn nod from Geordie, whose eyes, half closed, seemed to be visualizing a distant scene. Lord Archie swung his lantern toward the lower path. "Come along, men. Let's hope that we find him still alive and not too badly hurt. There at the bottom of the cliff." The others followed, all but Geordie, who turned in the direction of the upper path. Lord Archie called after him. "It's no use, Buchanan. We never could have climbed to the cliff top. A lad of only 12 years. Oh, he never could have climbed. Okay. "But young Lord Francis is a Douglas," Geordie called back. "Like yourself, Lord Archie. Once his sight is set, he will see it through, as far as he is able." "So far as he is able." Lord Archie repeated those ominous words as he and his men continued down into the ravine, fearing for the worst where his young cousin Francis was concerned. Alone, Buchanan scaled the slope to the very edge of the cleft, where he groped along, sometimes lowering the lantern over a void that threatened to swallow him. If he took one false step, echoing in his mind was the cry, "Geordie," so real that Buchanan almost failed to hear the feeble gasp that actually came from only a few yards below. There Geordie saw the chalk-white face of young Lord Francis looking up from between two widespread hands, their fingers dug deep into the cracks of the cliff. Geordie placed the lantern on rocky ground beside him, squirmed to the brink and worked his body and one knee into a hollow, extended his hand down over the brink. He ordered, "Steady now. When I take your wrist, let go with your hand. That's right. Now grip my wrist above. Keep it locked." Geordie's other hand slid wide and gained a similar hold on the boy's opposite wrist. Calm as ever, he continued, I'm going to swing you to my shoulder, lad, as I did when you were a wee bairn. Let your feet loose so your body dangles, but start those feet climbing when I haul you up. There was a slight jerk as the boy's feet went free, then Geordie was swinging him pendulum fashion, one way, then the other. One wide swing took the boy far out along the cliffside, where he hung for a perpetual moment above the deadly void. Then Geordie's powerful arms brought him the other way in a still greater sweep. As it neared its limits, with the boy's legs pointed at a wide angle, Geordie's anchored knee gave a powerful upward drive. Recoiling as from a piston stroke, Geordie rolled completely over in the opposite direction. The light from the light form of Lord Francis was snapped upward almost to the brink. The boy was using his feet to clamber, as Geordie had told him, and his knees met the rock edge with bruising force. He was still short of the rim, but there was nothing that he could grab, while his hands and wrists were locked with Geordie's. However, no grab was needed. Geordie's brawny forearms gave a timely tug in just the right direction. Boy and man finished their roll safely on the cliff top, in the glow of the lantern perched only a few feet away. Soon Geordie was swinging the same lantern on the end of a long stick as a signal to those below. Scouts could be heard in the rising wind as they were not needed. Lord Archie and his crew knew that Geordie must have found Lord Francis and that the boy was safe, but they did not learn the full details of the remarkable rescue until later. Even then, and during the months that followed, people were more impressed by the events leading up to the rescue rather than the deed itself. That young Lord Francis had climbed to the top of a cliff no one ever before had scaled alone was almost unbelievable. But for Geordie to have sensed the situation and to have found the exact spot where the boy clung seemed still more wonderful. Then, too, there was the distant call, unheard by anyone except Geordie, for whom it was intended. Gradually, the opinion spread that old Geordie was a Tasher, or a person gifted with the power of second sight, which enabled him to vision events from afar and announce the approach of the unexpected. This was a common belief in the Scottish Highlands in the late 1850s, the period when Lord Francis had his boyhood adventure, but Geordie Buchanan was quite different from the usual Highland seer. Never did Geordie display his strange ability by predicting local events, foreseeing funerals, or glimpsing weird lights known as corpse candles, which were regarded as spectral tokens of death or disaster. Geordie's uncanny reputation hinged entirely on the affinity between himself and Lord Francis, who was young enough to be his grandson. From the day when Geordie Buchanan was the trusted family retainer, had first carried the wee bairn on his shoulder, he had come to know the child's slightest whim indeed. Geordie's tales of the Highlands could very well have shaped the boy's love of the fells and crags that studded his native land. The fact that Geordie knew where young Francis might have gone and why could have accounted for the inner voice that had drawn the old retainer to the brink of the cliff. If he had stopped there, it might have been forgotten. As it was, from then on, the affinity increased. There were times when Geordie probably furthered it and even may have laid the groundwork for events to come. Such was true the day when Geordie asked Lord Francis, "Why, lad, did you climb the giant's pillar alone?" "Because I wanted to be the first to do it." "A fine thought, lad, but you could always share that glory with another. 'Twould have been better having someone start with you at the bottom, rather than having to call on me to help you at the top." That's true, Geordie, but I almost made it, and almost can be the same as never. Thinking back, young Francis agreed that Geordie was right. Solemnly, he promised, "All right, Geordie, I'll never climb alone again." "Now don't cut it that thin, lad," Geordie warned. At times you can venture alone, but take the right precautions. When you climbed the pillar, you might have at least carried a rope and looped it over some friendly rock. But how would you have helped me? But how would you have helped me up? It would have been it. It wouldn't have, lad, but it would have helped you down. Didn't you think of that? No, Geordie, I didn't. All I wanted was to get to the top. That's how I managed to get that far. Aye, but it was not far enough. If you had gone down the cliff, lad, you could have tried going up again. If at first you don't succeed. Remember the old saying, lad? I remember. Lord Francis remembered Geordie's words a few years later when he and a friend named Malcolm Hay had climbed through a snow-filled ravine to the 3,500-foot summit of Corrag Bude. From there, they had simply to follow a narrow ridge of barren rock to a twin peak. The danger seemed negligible. We're going to find out what happens next time with Geordie. Let's see. Okay, this one isn't too long. Okay, anyways, we've been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgivable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson, and we have been specifically reading The Edge of Doom. Anyways, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, want to support me in any way, if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.